Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum to all of you. I hope that you all are fine, happy and fresh. This is your science teacher Muhammad Mashood Khan, and we are discussing chapter number 7, that is forces and their effects. In this chapter, or in the last lecture, we have discussed force, how a force is measured and why do things float. So before starting today's lecture, I will recall the previous knowledge. So what is force? Force is a push or a pull, or force is an agent that can cause a motion in an object which was at rest, or it can stop a moving object, or even it can change the direction of a moving object. Then we discussed that how a force is measured. So we said that force is measured by a force meter. This has a spring inside. The larger the force, the more the spring will stretch and further the pointer of this force meter move. So this is how the force was measured, and we discussed it in detail. Then we discussed about that why do things float. So for this, we suppose that the object is hung in a beaker of water. Notice how the reading on the force meter was smaller. The object has appeared to lose weight. But the Greek philosopher Archimedes noticed this about 2000 years ago. He suggested that the object had not really lost weight, but that it was the water pushing up on it that made it seem as if had lost the weight. Archimedes discovered that the amount of upward force, or the upward push, or upthrust, was equal to the weight of the water that had been displaced by the object. So this is what we have discussed earlier. Now today we are going to discuss about the balanced forces. So it says it is upthrust that keeps a boat float. A floating boat displaces a large volume of water. This water provides enough upthrust on the hull to balance the weight of the boat pushing downwards. So basically, upthrust force is the force which is provided by the water on the ship when the ship is floating in the water, in the sea water. So when this ship is floating, it is displacing a large volume of water. So that displaced water provides the enough upthrust on the hull. Hull is the lower part of the ship, to balance the weight of the boat pushing downwards. So this is how a ship floats on a sea. So ultimately, if you summarize it, the weight of the boat is acting downward, while the same amount of push is provided by the water whose direction is upward, which is called the upthrust force, due to which the ship floats on the water. If the weight of the object becomes greater than this upthrust, then the boat will sink. It will not float. Any object whose weight becomes greater than this upthrust, or the weight overcomes the upthrust force, in that case the object will sink in the water, otherwise it will float. So the next topic that we are going to discuss is the density. So what is density? Density is mass per unit volume. Like if we have a block of lead, so we see that it has much more mass in every centimeter than a block of wood. So we know that lead is denser, or has a higher density than a wood. So the equation of the density is equals to mass per volume, and the unit of density is gram per centimeter cube or kg per meter cube. So if I explain you the density in the detail, I will just like to introduce the example of the comparison between a 1 kg stone and a 1 kg of cotton. So if you will notice that 1 kg of cotton is occupying a lot of space as compared to 1 kg of stone. So why this is happening? So if you notice, if we take the 1 centimeter from both the objects, you will see that the number of molecules in 1 centimeter of the stones, the number of molecules are much greater as compared to 1 centimeter of the cotton, which means that the stone is denser than cotton, We can take the other example or another comparison of wood and lead. The same way we take, if we take a 1 feet long bar of a lead, and at the same size if we take the wood, so you will notice that wood is lighter than the lead. Why? Because lead is much denser than the wood. It means that number of molecules per centimeter will be much more greater, or the mass which is occupied in 1 centimeter is much greater than the other one. So this is something about density. Something to note is that water has a density of 1 gram per centimeter cube. Objects having a density less than this will float in water. Objects having a density higher than this will sink in the water. Like if you have any object whose density is greater than 1 gram per centimeter cube, for example it is 2 gram, 3 gram, 4 gram, whatever, greater than 1 gram, it will sink in the water, and the rest whose density is less than 1 gram per centimeter cube, they will float in the water. So this is something you can note down. So now, do you know ships that float higher in seawater than in fresh water? This is because seawater is denser than the fresh water. The denser a liquid is, greater is the upthrust. So this is some extra information you can note down. Now there are some exercise question answer. The first question is, what appears to happen to the weight of an object when it is submerged in water? So the answer of the question is, it seems to lose weight. It is experimentally proven that when an object is submerged in the water, it seems that it has lost the weight, but actually it doesn't lose the weight. Basically because there is a upthrust force of water, so some of the force is lifted up by that force. So that is why the object seemed to be less heavier. The next question is, explain why this happens. So when submerged in water, the water pushes against the object, giving an impression that the object has lost weight. In other words, the upward push or upthrust is equal to the weight of the water that had been displaced by the object. So this is what I have already explained it, that basically that is the upthrust force or the upward push provided by the water, due to which the object seemed to be less heavier when submerged in the water. Otherwise the weight of the object is exactly the same as in the air. The next question is, water has a density of 1 gram per centimeter cube. What does this mean? So the answer of the question is, this means that once 1 cubic centimeter of water weighs 1 gram. The next question is, explain how balance forces enable a boat to float. So a floating boat displaces a large volume of water. This water provides enough thrust on the hull to balance weight of the boat pushing downward. So when the ship is floating in the water, what is happening, that it is displacing a large amount of water. So that displaced water provides enough upthrust on the ship which balances the ship, or which provides the ship to sink, so it floats. The next question is, the Dead Sea has a very high salt content. Explain why it is easier for a swimmer to float in the Dead Sea than in a swimming pool containing fresh water. So the answer of the question is, because the high salt content in the Dead Sea, the density of the water is very high. The body of the swimmer will float because it is less denser than the seawater. So just discussed earlier that if an object whose density is 1 gram per centimeter cube, if the density is less than this, it will float, otherwise it will sink. Well, while talking about the Dead Sea, the density of the Dead Sea is much greater as compared to the fresh water. So which means that it will provide a great upthrust force to the object. So which means that the object will not sink, it will float. So this is why it happened. So I hope that you have understood this all, and if there will be